What we'll be exploring more at Defense of Freedom Institute are ways to kind of cut off that union access from those young adults who are eager to learn how to teach and from those young teachers who are ready to teach, not become a union foot soldier, but to teach.
Welcome back to another episode of Making the Leap. We are glad to have you here today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation that we're having. It's kind of our repeat guest. I think the one we've had on the most with us is repeat, even though...
Because she's smart.
She is smart, and it doesn't... I mean, I looked back, though. It's been over a year since we've had her, but she's still somebody that continually comes up because these topics of education and education freedom and parent involvement, parent choice, these are hot topics.
And she's in demand. She's actually moved from when we last spoke to her to a new organization called the Defense of Freedom Institute. Ginny Gentles is our guest today again. Jenny, it's great to have you back.
Great to have you.
So great to be here. Good to see you all.
So could we start by talking a little bit about the Defense of Freedom Institute? Would love to know what that's all about. You were with, I think still are, affiliated with Independent Women's Forum, but tell us a little more about the new gig.
Yes, happily still affiliated with IWF, Independent Women's Forum, as a senior fellow. I have moved to Defense of Freedom Institute for Policy Studies to lead up a new initiative that they've launched on education freedom and parental rights. And that's, as you all know, my thing. I am a huge advocate for expanding educational opportunities and for ensuring that we are protecting parental rights. And I'm thankful that DFI, which is a fairly new organization, they launched about 3 years ago, has created this opportunity to explore these issues. But to be honest, DFI was already doing this. It's a very small group of lawyers and policy experts who come at issues when it comes to education, labor, and workforce from a conservative perspective, from a solutions-oriented perspective. How do we expand opportunities? How do we protect rights?
And so with that switch, with your moving over to DFI and being there, how does that institute, does it work with parents, for parents? Is it something that happens behind the scenes? When you mention lawyers and policymakers, that is something then that is more of a higher level, or something that parents can tap into?
So, Christina, I'm glad that you asked, because when I was at IWF, the focus was more those parents, ensuring that parents who were frustrated with school closures, with masks, with what was being taught in classrooms, with the system ignoring learning loss, making sure those parents didn't feel just stuck with anger and hopelessness, and pointing them to education freedom, to transparency, to solutions. So it was a broad effort to reach parents whose eyes were opened, particularly during that era of COVID closures and what followed. My work at DFI will be, Defense of Freedom Institute, will be focused more on the DC policymaking community, which I have to admit I am part of. I live within the Beltway. So I will continue as much as possible to educate parents broadly that they do have hope, they do have opportunities, they don't have to be stuck in anger. And but the work that I'll be doing on a day-to-day basis will be aimed at the DC policy making community so that they know the good news of what's happening in the states when it comes to school choice, education freedom, and they're open to appropriate federal solutions on these issues.
You know, we have, sorry to interrupt that, we have talked with Governor Sanders recently and other governors who have had successes with school choice in their states, Jenny, and one of the things that we always ask them is, what do you think the federal role in education is? It won't surprise you that most of them say, we'd prefer if it were none. But
that is a completely understandable response when you think about 10%, sometimes less, of the funding for K-12 education is coming from the federal government. But if you look at the state Department of Education employee list, I bet a lot of those people are there servicing those federal dollars. And then when you go down to the district level, there are a whole lot of district staff employees that are just there to run federal programs, which is ridiculous. So all of these strings and regulations and oversight and employment for adults and administrative costs come with these federal dollars. And I'm sure that a state leader is like, just leave us alone. We know what to do. State leader like Governor Sanders.
Like the Title IX discussion, right? That was something we talked with Governor Sanders about. This was federal dollars being threatened at colleges and schools and school districts at the state level. If they did not comply, they would lose or they'd be askew of Title IX, which means they would lose federal funds. That was the threat there from the Biden administration, if I'm correct.
Yeah, and it's always the threat. It never actually happens. I do wish that people would realize that the federal government often threatens, we will withhold federal funds if you don't do exactly what we say. There's no actual experience of that happening. But what the states and the districts are trying to avoid, and what does happen, are investigations. There's an Office of Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education that is quick to investigate if something is happening that they don't like. And when you're talking about Biden-Harris regime, what they don't like are things like misgendering or other things that really has nothing to do with civil rights, certainly doesn't have to do with education or education quality. And so that really bogs down a school district and a school when they are stuck having to respond to these Office of Civil Rights or OCR investigations.
You know, and I was reading an article about there was a bus tour that took the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, that he went in early September and traveled through Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And their goal that they said was for this bus tour.
Gee, what now? Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. What a strange selection
weird,
by the
right?
Secretary of Education, Ginny.
And not only that, this was, it will remind the focus was to remind the American people why the Biden-Harris administration has unapologetically fought for public education, the foundation of opportunity in this country, and then goes on and on and on. And my jaw dropped when I read that. And of course, here we are in those states that are going to be crucial to the upcoming election. But I just thought, wow, you need a bus tour to promote what is happening, promote candidates, and promote the whole idea of this education department that really is doing nothing but causing more troubles. When you started talking, I thought, oh my gosh.
Yeah, Vladimir Zelensky just paid a visit to Pennsylvania. I mean, the federal government is dispatching all kinds of folks to the states ahead of this election, aren't they, Jenny?
Well, yeah, and we need to walk it back a little bit to the summer AFT and NEA conventions. And, those are the two big unions that have teachers in them. The NEA, National Education Association, really is a K-12 teachers union, about 3 million members. The AFT is called American Federation of Teachers, but it's actually this amalgamation of a bunch of AFL-CIO bargaining units, including healthcare, Planned Parenthood workers, doctors, ground control, all these people who don't actually teach in K-12 environments. Randy Weingarten is the head of that entity, AFT. So she's not actually the leader of a teachers union. I do want people to know that. But both of these organizations, NEA, AFT, had these summer conventions, and the whole focus was on campaigning at first for Biden, but then they quickly pivoted to Harris. AFT was the first union to endorse Harris. Both entities have formed. Initially, it was called Educators for Biden. I guess it's probably Educators for Harris now. And they spent those summer conventions telling their members that they must go, not just vote, but they must go campaign for these candidates. So when you see the Secretary of Education going to those battleground states and advocating for public education, let's just know that he is going to rally those union troops who have been ordered by their leaders to not just vote for Harris and any other union-endorsed candidate, but to go campaign for them. And so that's what the unions are doing right now. And Secretary Cardona is making sure they get the attaboy, attagirl for doing that.
It makes me cringe when I think back to my very, very early days of teaching, where I was part of a union, and mad at all the mailers I was getting, but still felt like I had to be there. And I bet there are people sitting in positions like that in unions that don't really fully understand. I was a first-year teacher, second-year teacher, kind of knew in my gut what was happening, what I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing.
And now
I was a kid, but you've got new teachers entering the workforce all the time. And I just think what a travesty that's probably still continuing. And it's such a machine. You don't even really know that you're caught up in it.
Though I have to say, people at that age now, Jenny, you'd probably confirm, and you hate to paint with a broad brush,
right.
But these days, even at Christian universities that are producing teachers, we find that a lot of younger teachers that are coming out of education programs to go teach come with an ideology, not just a skill set to teach the basics, but come with an ideology packaged with it.
I worry about that when you look at expanding school choice programs, that you also need to make sure that you're expanding the pipeline of qualified, committed teachers who don't have to be deprogrammed before they're in a classroom and who know the science of reading and care about the true aspects of educating rather than indoctrinating students. And so, what we all have to keep our eye on are these colleges of education, which are just training grounds for future union members. And those unions go in and they recruit at the College of Education level. They also recruit at the orientation stage when new teachers are coming into the district. And Christine, I don't think you should fault yourself. You probably were told at orientation, you have to sign up for the union because unions have direct access to young teachers. And that's what they tell you. If you don't sign up with the union, you won't have the liability insurance that you absolutely need.
Yeah.
That's not true. But what we have to do, and what we'll be exploring more at Defensive Freedom Institute, are ways to kind of cut off that union access from those young adults who are eager to learn how to teach, and from those young teachers who are ready to teach, not become a union foot soldier, but to teach.
Are the organizations that provide kind of that, I'll call it that protection that unions, were purported to offer, are those growing? Are they expanding? Are they readily accessible? That was something that I did not learn about till I was on my way out of education, that, oh my gosh, there are options that should I be sued if I need representation, that they exist. Are those growing with this? Is that something that you're part of?
You're talking about non-union legal protection.
Right,
Okay.
right. Or
Yes,
groups that are more conservative in their thinking, that aren't out there supporting.
Or neutral.
Right.
We'll take neutral, right?
Just neutral.
So
yes.
yeah, absolutely. I think that they're growing. I think that they aren't the aggressive marketers that they need to be to spread the word. And so that's where I want to help with that,
Great.
to make sure that we are spreading the word so that teachers are aware of these organizations, these alternatives. And there's an in-between step for the people who have already signed up for a union. They can go to an organization called Americans for Fair Treatment, or to an organization called the Freedom Foundation. There are various organizations out there where if you go in, there's tools on their website, you put in where you live, and they tell you how to get out of your union. And then they also point you to these union alternatives that provide these other options. And those can be like an Association of Christian Educators, but then there's also, I think it's like American AAE. We can look up and add in what the name of that is. But there are these alternative entities that provide the benefits at lower cost, and you don't have to be a union member.
Let me talk about curriculum a little bit, Ginny, because it's funny. On the same day in the month of September, in fact, on September 4th, there are two stories, one from Politico, one from The Hill, and they're both about mandates in curriculum at the state level. Headline from New York City Public Schools mandate Black Studies curriculum. From Politico, Republicans pushing Christianity into public schools are hitting resistance. Now, you can imagine how these are framed. The Black Studies curriculum being mandated in New York.
Wonderful.
That's fantastic. Pushing Christianity in places like Oklahoma, Texas, and Louisiana. Problematic.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting discussion that there are, in fact, states that are saying, hey, we think the Bible is history and you ought to teach it. And schools fighting this, but it's completely sane in other parts of the country like New York to say, oh, this is all about inequality and, the white hierarchy, and everyone needs to understand that as part of the history, and that's just fine. I mean, I think we all understand it if you follow politics, what it means, but what do you think about the changes in curriculum from state to state?
Well, it's absolutely a state role to set the curriculum, and I certainly wouldn't want to see another attempt like Common Core to set curriculum at the federal level. So it's the role of the state, I shouldn't say the role of the state to set curriculum. It's the role of the state to set broad standards. And then generally you have a district that is choosing a curriculum that aligns with the standards. But in states that take the curriculum really seriously and high quality education, they try to point out, hey, this is a vetted and good curriculum. And so I support that process. That's appropriate within public education. I'm also thankful to be the parent of two children in private schools that have an alternative approach to that. And the curriculum is set appropriate to those private schools and to those communities. On the Bible thing, the pushing the Bible or pushing Christianity, I think you're doing a real disservice to students, to future adults, if they don't have some element of biblical literacy, just from a literature perspective, just from understanding what Abraham Lincoln is saying in his speeches. There's so many references that they won't get if they don't have basic biblical literacy. I went to public schools in Florida growing up. The Bible was not taught as something like you should believe in this particular belief system. It just was taught from here are some aspects of the Bible that you might need to know in order to understand other things that come up in literature. It's just like understanding mythology is important to understand other aspects and references in literature. So I think the whole freak out around anything to do with the Bible needs to just be dialed down.
We were just in Washington, and Christine and I were walking through the Lincoln Memorial. It had been some time, and so we were refreshing our memories, and you pointed out, and it was worth pointing out, I'm glad you did, because I hadn't really considered it, the second inaugural address that's etched in the wall there in the memorial is replete with references to God and the Bible and, the war and how both sides cleaved to God and both thought they were on God's side. But the remarkable point in that is that Lincoln, in an inaugural address, regularly referenced, to your point, the Bible and faith and this lust to get it yanked from the public discourse is just absurd. I mean, it is foundational, whether people want to acknowledge it or not.
It's not a belief issue.
Yeah.
It's just an informational issue, which I think then allows freedom of thought. I mean, we're talking about now not allowing people to even think and analyze something, not giving them that option, which is problematic. And I think that's what kind of made this whole push to get out of publication or public education a big deal, because we were, as parents, realizing, right, that there was a lot that was not being allowed anymore to allow free thinking and to allow conversation.
And Jenny, I would just add to that, it's not really a question, it's a statement. I'd love your response to it. I just saw a study, and I think it was the University of Pennsylvania that said something like 1,600 adults surveyed don't know basic civics anymore. They don't even really know what the First Amendment's about or what it says or what it protects. And that gets to a natural rights issue, and where do natural rights come from? And if you don't understand civics and you don't understand that, then good grief, what do you have as a country like ours, Jenny?
Well, your statement is an alarming one and a true one. When you look at the nation's report card, or NAEP, where students across the country, a sample of students across the country are tested, we often talk about the reading and math scores, and we're concerned because those are low. But what's lower is history and civics scores, and they're extremely low. You're talking like 12% when you're talking about history. Not much higher when you're talking about civics. So I do think we've got a problem, and we're doing a real disservice to students if we're not teaching them history, if we're not teaching them just how to function in a democracy. The left, the unions, they talk a lot about the threat to democracy. They pretend that the public education system is the great protector of democracy. Yet they're withholding information about the tools of operating within a democracy by not teaching civics or history. So they need to get it straight. But we also need to make sure we have education options, education freedom, so that families that are like, never mind, I'm going to go find an alternative, have that option to do that.
Well, along those lines, I guess I did want to, well, first I'll say it, I don't know if this is good or bad, but I just own it. Our impetus for moving districts, moving our daughter out of public education in general, but moving across the country really wasn't based in this idea of academic rigor. I wasn't overly concerned with the fact that our kid, they weren't behind. I didn't feel like our district wasn't teaching. Yet I know that's not the case across the board for so many. And I'm wondering, as we start to get results like what you just mentioned, we start to see that parents can't find access to pre-COVID data regarding education, when we can't find things to compare, and then we start to see all these failing grades in reading. All these students are graduating, they can't read. They can't read at the 4th grade level. There they are again at the 8th grade level. They can't read, and now they can't read as they graduate. Why then, with all that information, knowing that that's factual, why are there so many misconceptions still about school choice for parents? Why are they not more on board with understanding what benefits that could have? It wasn't top of mind for me, but I still thought we should be able to go where we need to go. And if you're in a failing school, like those that you've mentioned, districts that are really struggling, states that are at the bottom of the pile in terms of education, why is it that there are still these problems as we look at school choice where it's taking so long to kind of get off the ground?
Do you mean with teachers in schools?
I mean with parents trying
parents
to
not embracing it.
Yes, parents that aren't, that they fight it. They fight it when there's options for vouchers, when there's options to go from one school to another. I'm just curious about that.
Well, I think a lot of parents aren't fighting it. They're kind of stuck in neutral. And I know, Christine, you also have a high schooler like I do, and we're so busy
Yeah.
and we're so tired, right? Like, so a lot of it's just, thank goodness schools are open. Thank goodness our kids are busy. Thank goodness we're, it's not just during the week, but also on weekends that they're engaged in activities. But thank goodness things are normal again. So I do think a lot of parents are neutral or just not engaged on the school choice issue because they're busy and their kids off at school. Therefore, everything must be fine. Things are normal. What they don't know is that testing data of 8th graders that came out recently showed that they are a year behind. It would take 9 months of additional schooling to get them caught up. And that is absolutely alarming because they're never going to get those additional months of schooling. They are forever behind. So I think a lot of parents just don't know the data. It's not of interest to them when you're talking about national studies. We throw around NAEP and Nation's Report Card statistics all the time, and I think parents are like, not interested. Surely doesn't apply to my kid's district, my kid's school. And then when they're looking at the information about their specific district, the districts have a federal mandate, a federal requirement to issue report cards, and they make it as confusing as possible. So there's no way that the parents are getting information about their school districts. And then when they look at their child's report card, we have rampant grade inflation. So schools are telling the families lies about their child's progress and accomplishments and aptitude, and that is wrong.
There is a tremendous siren song, and there has been for decades. I say this pretty frequently. I was talking to a friend of mine over the weekend about, you can go all the way back to the Beach Boys singing "Be True to Your School." There is this thing. This, if you want, almost propaganda. And I was proud of my high school.
Right.
I still am. I'm in my, thank you very much, high school Hall of Fame. I really enjoyed my time in high school, public high school. I did. I don't really feel like it was as off the rails as it is today, though, to be fair. But the rallying around your high school and your public school in a community is so important to so many people. It's important to the community, and it almost seems like heresy to talk about pulling your kids from the community school because it employs so many people, particularly if it's a smaller community. And I guess I appreciate that in one sense. It's not as though you want to be hostile or antagonistic if that's what people choose, but this notion that that's the only way. And if you're not on team public school, then you're out,
Yeah, I actually was introduced recently as, this is Ginny. She was in pep band. But I had just been talking to the person about how I'd been in marching band in high school, and then that translated to pep band in college. And that is a part of my identity. And it was something that, maybe is a little embarrassing. I wasn't the coolest kid, but was awesome and very much bonds me and connects me both to my friends who were in marching band with me in high school and who still live in that community, and to, my memories about that high school. It was good. It doesn't mean that that's for everybody.
Right.
Not everybody should go to that high school. And great if kids in my community are going to a public school and they're not going to the local public school that's dealing with a lot of fentanyl overdoses. They're not going to the one that's extremely snobby and exclusive to kids who are wired differently, or they are going to those and it's not bothering them. Those aren't great options for my kids.
Right.
And I can afford to send my children to private schools. Not everyone can, and that's why we need to have school choice.
Right.
I don't think it's a controversial thing. I don't think it's a condemnation of our memories which are, of course, get fonder and hazier as
Sure.
they get older, of public school. And it's not necessarily a condemnation of the public school or the community that's loves their public school. It's just an option. It's an alternative. And some kids really, really need and really deserve those options.
Well, hopefully this, with what you're doing, I think with things, maybe no more bus tours going through areas, but, or doing something to counter it, hopefully that will reach, that message will reach parents. I think that's an important thing. I really appreciate your time today coming on and talking with us. This was just I'm excited for you. I'm excited to see what this does, but I'm also excited to see how this can kind of help push things out in a way that makes education accessible in ways, like you said, that are much needed for people that really, really are in areas that that are problematic.
Ginny, as we wrap, Defense of Freedom Institute, you are the Director of Educational Freedom and Parental Rights Initiative. Can people contact you, research, do some more work on your behalf, or ask you questions, or how do you prefer?
For sure. I mean, you can follow me on Twitter at Ginny Gentles. And I say that, although I would love to get off Twitter one of these days.
Amen.
Right?
Yeah.
Don't we all?
Wouldn't
Yeah.
we all? And then DFI has a website, dfipolicy.org. We'll be launching a podcast soon, yet to be
Great.
named, open to options, and then issuing a regular newsletter that alternates between highlighting and celebrating education freedom and what's happening at the states, what could happen at the federal level, and exposing teachers unions and the harm not the teachers are causing, but the harm that teachers union leaders are causing around the country.
Which
so
is just-
stay tuned for those newsletters and that podcast.
Key distinction for
Yeah.
sure.
Jenny, thanks so much for your time. We're grateful to have you back, and congratulations on the new job.
Thank you both.
And that'll do it for this week's edition of Making the Leap. Hope you will give this a review of your own if you're an Apple podcaster. 5-star review is always appreciated at Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Keep informed with us by following us on social media. Let us know what you think by reaching out to us. We always appreciate your correspondence. And until next week, we'll see you next time on Making the Leap.
Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. We'd love your feedback by rating us and commenting on the show.
And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Making the Leap.